before we break for lunch, I'll invite you. Before we break for lunch, we have one more fireside chat for you. There are so many interesting officials here on the sidelines of UNGA, and we wanted to include as many as we could, and we're so delighted to welcome today a speaker from Turkey. We have with us the Deputy Minister of Foreign Affairs, Ahmed Yildiz. Turkey plays such a pivotal role in the region. It carries so much weight and influence, and we're truly honored to have an opportunity to hear from His Excellency today. His Excellency has been a member of the Foreign Affairs Ministry since 1989, serving in many critical posts in the Middle East, including as Deputy Chief of Mission in Riyadh and Damascus and as Consul General in Mosul. He has served as Turkey's ambassador to Sarajevo and been a principal consultant to the Prime Minister since 2014. Thank you, Your Excellency. Leading the conversation is the Middle East Institute's VP for Policy, Brian Katulis. Brian is a leading foreign policy and U.S. national security analyst who specialized in the Middle East for several decades. He also brings U.S. government experience, having worked at the National Security Council and the Departments of Defense and State. Gentlemen, I'd like to invite you to take your seats on the stage, and I would like to encourage everyone else to return now to their seats, please. Thank you all very much.
Hello, everyone. In addition to being a Vice President for Policy at the Middle East Institute, I, along with His Excellency, have the distinguished honor to be the two men that stand between you and your lunch, which will take place in about half an hour. And before lunch, I can guarantee you, because I've had a chat with the Deputy Minister in the green room before, I can guarantee you that we're going to offer you some excellent food for thought that you can talk about while you eat your actual food over lunch. Your Excellency, welcome to the forum. It's a true honor to have you here. As our friends from Saudi Arabia and other places say, we want to expand this forum to include countries that play an important role in the region. You know the region very well because you served in many places, Riyadh, I believe in Mosul and Syria and other places, and you know it very well. So welcome, and I think you know MEI. As we mentioned, in about 2 weeks, some of our colleagues will be going not only to Istanbul, where everybody goes, but we're going to Ankara for an ongoing track 2 dialogue that we have with counterparts in Turkey. And we really relish that relationship, and I just wanted to welcome you again, a warm welcome for coming and joining us here today. I wanted to start out because today's forum is about opportunities. It's about things changing and hopefully in a positive direction. We'll get to problems. Certainly there's a lot in the region. But I wanted to ask you your snapshot of how you see the broader Middle East today, because you've served in it, and here we are in September 23. There's lots of talk on different issues we'll get into. But as I was doing my homework, I read a speech you gave to the European NATO parliamentary body about August of 2020, about 3 years ago. And you were describing a Middle East that I think looks quite different today than what it was back then. So the first general question, from your vantage point in Ankara and from all of your deep experience, how do you see the Middle East changing, and what are those positive silver linings that you see emerging?
Thank you, Brian. Indeed, Minister Fidan should have been here, but I think now he may be solving important problems with Secretary Blinken. That's why he's not here. Let me try to replace him. Of course, when I served in Libya first in 90s, beginning of 90s, later in Syria twice during first years of Bashar Assad, later in Mosul and in Saudi Arabia, it was different times. Now, to summarize it, what I can see after returning from parliamentary service 5 years to the ministry, what I see from the files and from the debates here, that I think compared to 10 years ago, and the Middle East is evolving in the right direction. What I mean is, of course, there are a lot of deconfliction mechanisms, a lot of normalization efforts, and somehow the reconciliation culture is improving. This is the most important thing. I can say that after my experience in the Council of Europe 5 years and NATO PA, because this was the main reason for turning the disputes to the conflicts, lack of reconciliation culture or mechanisms. Of course, Turkey, as the, how can I say, most European, most Western country in the Middle East, is happy to see that, to be part of it. Our own normalization efforts with many countries in the region are working well. But after 5 years in the parliament, when I returned, I got these files in my portfolio: Middle East, Africa, South Asia, and other thematic files. What I see, most of the problems are same. One is deteriorating very much, Palestine, although there is no actual conflict or violence, not much. What I saw here is that there is an increasing awareness on the future of two-state solution, which is the real solution.
Yes.
I am happy there is an awareness on this here, but also I was shocked on the lack of enough attention to the Syrian file.
Yes.
Here, almost no leader touched on this in the speeches, and there was almost no side activity on Syria. Of course, Yemen is moving in the right direction. There is not much violence. I am optimistic. I am optimistic, and I think Turkey will be the main actor in pushing the things in right direction with this Western experience, especially NATO and Council of Europe.
Yes.
And I will be part of it happily.
Great.
Thank you.
Yeah, well, I wanted to pick up on some of the themes that you talked about, and I should have also mentioned that MEI, of course, has had a Turkey program for more than a dozen years, headed by our...
But you invited me for the first time.
What's that?
I am here for the first time.
Yeah, you're here for the first time. But we, our colleague Ganu Tul, who's looked at your foreign policy and the domestic situation, and with a range of, I think, thoughtful scholars as part of her program. One thing you mentioned was Palestine and the Palestine question, and I know I'm surprised it's not really come up in this forum here just yet, but obviously there's been a lot of buzz about possible Israel-Saudi normalization accord. Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman gave an interview earlier this week which attracted a lot of attention, and I know your president met with Prime Minister Netanyahu. I don't know that you know the details in that meeting, but I wanted to get your sense from Ankara's perspective of what are the real prospects here of an Israel-Saudi normalization accord, and then where importantly does this deteriorating issue of Palestine and the Palestinian people fit within that framework from your perspective?
Of course, Saudi Arabia is one of the strong defenders of the Palestinian cause. It has always been. In the absence of any real statement from both sides on the content of this, I don't want to comment. But what I know, that Saudi leadership will not make a deal at the expense of basics of the Palestinian case.
Yes.
You know that. So that's why I'm optimistic about any decision by the Saudi side on this that they will.
Yes.
So,
yeah.
Because they are as part of Arab League and a leader in the GCC and also in the Organization of Islamic Cooperation. I am not worried about what Saudis will do. Of course, on our side, we, as you mentioned, we are building up again on our relations with Israel, but
yes.
our stance on Palestine is there.
Yes.
And it is in harmony with the almost huge majority of the international community and Europe and others. So if any possible normalization deal will serve to the calm stability in the region and to the fair solution of Palestinian state, it is welcome.
Yes.
And I am sure Saudis will do it that way. What alarming now, of course, is that we don't hear any commitment, to any end game from the Israeli side. This is the worrying.
Yeah, they're not clear, and
Yes.
if you look at some of their ministers in their government, it's clear what they're against, but it's not clear what they're for in terms of.
I cannot talk here for Israeli opposition,
Yes.
but internationally, that this is the missing point on the Palestinian-Israeli process.
And before I move from the Palestinian question, because I know Turkey also has a very deep ties with a number of actors across the Palestinian spectrum. I know in other countries like Qatar and Egypt play a role. I think Saudi Arabia has been also trying to step this up. How do you see sort of the challenges within Palestinian politics and sort of the disunity between Gaza and the West Bank? And is there a role that Ankara can play in trying to mediate those?
We did, and we continue to do our best, but there are other countries also to play this role as good as us. Intra-Palestinian dialogue and unification of institutions certainly may help in strengthening the Palestinian position in the negotiations and in their interactions, and giving hope to the international community as a kind of united interlocutor for anybody. But here, what can I say? Israeli stance is important. That if there is a kind of, let's say, moderate approach to the Palestinian side, it will help.
Yeah.
The one issue is always raised by the international community: lack of elections.
Yes.
For a long time, but of course Turkey is always for elections for anywhere in Libya, in Palestine, but the conditions on the ground, especially in East Palestine.
Yes.
Israeli policies don't make it easy for holding any elections. I don't want to talk more about this because it is on the agenda of Turkish-Israeli relations context these days.
Right.
We will be always in good faith for a two-state solution.
Great. So that's a clear statement about where your country stands on that topic. I wanted to pivot to a broader issue, one that came up in the morning panel on energy and interlinkages, infrastructure projects, and things like this. And Turkey is a member of the G20, and in India, there was a big meeting, and I know the Biden administration and Jake Sullivan had been working quite a lot on this, and they announced an India, Middle East, Europe corridor. And I heard the reactions coming from your president and also your boss, the foreign minister. And I know that there's also an alternative Iraq development road initiative. I wanted to understand how you saw this development within the G20, the IMEC as it's called. And then is it a complementary project to what you've proposed in many different forums as a country? How does it fit with, as you see, also the U.S.-China competition on the Belt and Road Initiative? Because you have a very unique position at this crossroads between Europe and the Middle East, and would love to hear your views on this new IMEC.
For IMEC, we will see in the future when it gets detailed, if it fits or not. But I should say that Turkish-Iraqi development road to the Gulf, through Iraq, is not a new one, and it is not an alternative to this IMEC. Right. It was under discussion when I was Consul General in Mosul in 2009-10. But at that time, due to differences between the central government and Kurdish authority, it was not realized. So that's why it is not raised as an alternative to this. We have raised this before, together with, indeed, it was Iraqi initiative, because Iraq wants to benefit from Turkish connectivity, because Turkey, for its geographic position and for many PPP projects realized that is now, what can I say, master of the connectivity projects. We realize a lot of them. Now it will serve the regional countries like Iraq also, okay? Vice versa, of course. So it is up to other countries to develop their own corridors, the EU corridors in the Balkans.
Yes.
Everybody benefits it. But this Iraqi-Turkish development road is a kind of must for Iraq itself.
Right.
And it will be good for them to connect to Turkey. This is their only option, okay, when you take into consideration the situation in Syria, the future in Syria. Maybe we should touch more on Syria on this.
Yeah. We'll get there in a second. I first wanted to dive down a little bit more deeply on the Turkish-Iraqi bilateral relationship. We just mentioned the corridor there, but there are many issues, as you know. There's questions about the oil shipments that were paused. There's also concerns about PKK that your country has and cross-border strikes that have been conducted, and then water security. There's a number of issues. You served in Mosul, as you mentioned, in 2009, 2010. 2023, how do you see that bilateral relationship? I know there's been many contacts. What are the priorities and what are the biggest challenges there?
There were ups and downs over the years, but one thing is clear. Turkey did its best, both to help Iraq in general, with central government and the Kurdish region. As you said, the other problems like water and others, especially this oil pipeline. Indeed, this is an Iraqi-Turkish pipeline, and this verdict by the arbitration is there. So in light of all this, first we want to see a real deal between central government and Kurdish authority on the export of oil resources, on revenue sharing. It is indeed an Iraqi issue, not Turkish issue. But on difficult times in Iraq, during ISIL is there, central government cannot do much. Kurdish authority has budgetary issues that we try to help them in general. This is the result. And there are problems on, technical problems on pipeline. It is an old pipeline also, but it was somehow harmed due to earthquakes. That's. When these issues are solved, then the pipeline will continue to operate, of course. It is a lifeline for Iraq. Yes. Lifeline for Iraq. Yeah. But of course, this earthquake on both sides, Turkey and Syria, made a lot of impact, economic mainly. Right. But on Syrian side, of course, it is a very, what can I say, humanitarian issue.
Right. Yeah, let's jump to Syria in a second, but His Excellency has agreed to take at least a couple of questions from the audience. So for those of you who are interested in our conversation and finding gaps in the sort of issues or questions I'm raising, get those questions ready. He's ready to take them. But I want to ask you a few more questions before we turn to the audience. On Syria, and you mentioned earlier in our conversation, and I noticed this as well, here we are at UNGA, at the UN General Assembly meetings, and it really wasn't much of a feature. I think the concerns about Ukraine, hopefully we can get to, and Russia and what's going on there. But where do you see the situation in Syria right now, and how do you, from your vantage point in Ankara, see this effort by some of the other countries in the Middle East to normalize their ties with the Assad regime and the efforts to sort of bring them in? And what do you see as sort of the situation there?
I think for any normalization, there may be discussions, debates, but for any normalization, there should be at least some minimum criteria. In my point, one should be, of course, what is the future political transition? Because country cannot continue with this. After all, we cannot go as if nothing happened. Second, of course, terror organizations are there threatening the neighboring countries, and it should be addressed, and presence of other forces, countries from far away. And the last one, most probably maybe, regime should create the conditions, at least should consent to for creation of conditions conducive to the return of the Syrian migrants, refugees.
Right.
Most of them are in Turkey, and also, as Minister Safad said, are in other countries. Still now, regime seems reluctant on all of this. I hope Arab countries in the Arab League and we in the OIC and in other fora will be aware of all these. Indeed, Arab League put some of these conditions to the regime, but it is not fulfilled yet. I hope any silence, any inaction is tactical, not otherwise. If otherwise, it will spoil the regime. On the ground, of course, some deconfliction is working, but humanitarian conditions, humanitarian tragedy is there. Lack of any political solution is there. Of course, Captagon issue is there. Maybe some Ayman Safadi touched it. So there are a lot to do, but we can do this in calm times. Okay, not in conflict times. One issue is that international community should not forget Syrian moderate comprehensive opposition, because opposition is divided on somehow ethnic others. And unfortunately, two superpowers are serving some to the regime, some to the terror organizations. I urge all colleagues to follow the Turkish way of dealing with the opposition and with the problem. Yeah.
Great. Thanks for doing that. I'm going to ask two more questions, and they're the simplest ones before I turn it to the audience. So easy, and I left it to the last. Your country's bilateral relationship with Russia right now, and I know you play a very pivotal role. I think many of us saw President Erdogan's interview, which was very interesting. I highly recommended, with Amna Nawaz at the PBS NewsHour. He expressed sort of his view in his conversations with President Putin. How do you see Turkey's role with dealing with Russia, with all of the sets of issues, but importantly also the grain deal that you were key to actually executing initially?
Brian, it is not easy task. You know, we have issues with Russia in Syria, you know, for several years. And it dictated us a very delicate diplomacy. Okay? And Turkish President, Mr. Erdogan, and Turkish diplomats did good job. Also, Turkish army did good job. In one hand, on protecting the Syrian people and aborting sometimes more migration. And on Ukraine also, now we are doing this. Of course, it dictates dialogue with everybody. Turkish position is clear on Ukraine. Since 2014, we declared we will never recognize any annexation, any invasion of Ukrainian territory, especially Crimea. Crimea is very sensitive to us because of the native Turkish community there.
And that's nine years ago that happened.
Yes. Yeah. And now still, this is the position. We declared it. But on the other hand, we have to keep some dialogue with Russia because we are guardian of Montreux Convention in the Turkish Straits. So we have a role in Black Sea. Also, as we did in Syria, the dialogue is helping us on many issues like grain deals or exchange of prisoners, etc. But our sympathy and support with Ukraine is clear, and they know it, and they are grateful to it. Yeah. What can I say? The conditions are different. Our conditions are different from other countries, from the United States, from EU, and our actions position is fitting this. But Ukrainians know what we are doing for them very well. Okay.
Great. So before I turn to your questions, if we get one or two, I want to ask one last question, and it's on the bilateral relationship with the United States. Now, I'm sure from Ankara, when you look at what's happening in Washington, D.C., the daily developments in Congress that happen or our elections that are coming up, it probably seems perfectly rational and makes total sense to you, that it's clear where the U.S. is going in the region, and that was a joke. But there are big issues in the bilateral relationship, whether it's F-16s or the question of NATO membership for Sweden. How do you see now with President Erdogan's re-election, how do you see the pathway forward on U.S.-Turkish relations in the next phase? What do you see as the priorities and where do you see that going?
As during my tenure in the parliament, I had the opportunity to meet many U.S. senators, congressmen, representatives on many occasions. What I see is that these problems are not real, are not really bilateral things. Of course, Turkish needs for defense needs, that is first should be met from NATO countries for the sake of interoperability. But at that time, it was not possible. I think the action by Congress backfired. It should have been otherwise. So, what is needed here is some empathy. But I say that the conditions are very different. Okay. As a diplomat, I had preferred to buy Patriot because. To my amazement, at that time, it was unbelievable. Turkey has no air defense systems. We were doing this. The war in Syria is next to us. The Russian intervention is there. And Turkey was doing air defense just by F-16 planes, air fighter jets. It is unbelievable. So it was a rush to buy systems. Unfortunately, we couldn't buy it from United States Patriots. And President Trump declared it later. It was our fault, not Turkish fault. So it caused some chain reactions from both sides. But what I see, F-16 issue is important. F-16 shouldn't be linked to any other issue because Turkey is a very important NATO country with the second biggest army. A lot of NATO responsibility is not just national one, especially in Black Sea, in Middle East, in Syria. I never agree with this linkage. Turkey and United States has been cooperating on production of F-16s in Turkey also for almost 40 years. And it is a very good experience. It is a very success story. And Turkey did well with this F-16 in somehow deterring further actions of Russia in Syria, everybody knows that. That's why I think a dialogue without any precondition between the two sides. I am not responsible from U.S. portfolio, but will certainly help. And the two countries have enough experience from the past to do this. In the past, relations also were somehow strained. Later, they were unfrozen, they were unblocked by the sincere dialogue. I am hopeful about this. Of course, NATO expansion is another issue. Turkish diplomats in my age knows very well Turkey promoted NATO's expansion for always. But we were of the opinion that this is a two-side track. We will be united under NATO for security. We will be united under EU for economic and policy side. Unfortunately, Turkish EU process was blocked by the countries of EU several times. But it is another story.
Yes.
The deal is there for Sweden. If they apply what they committed, it is not something difficult to apply. I think Turkey is a deep-rooted state there to ratify it. Okay.
Great. Thank you, Your Excellency. So as I mentioned, I probably forgot some issues or some questions. If there's anyone out there that wants to join the discussion, please raise your hand, and a mic will come. And let's go, Joseph, right there. Tell us who you are, and if you've got an affiliation, right over there. Yeah. Oh, just two questions, sorry.
Thanks for doing this. Joseph Habush from Al Arabiya English. I just wanted to touch on the last topic you mentioned on the F-16s and the Russian, presumably the Russian air defense systems that you guys purchased. You mentioned that it was a rush decision. You guys needed it for your own national security interests. Seeing as the bilateral relationship with Washington has gotten better over the past couple months, be it with the administration or on the Hill, there's CODELs and members of and senators going out to Turkey. I wanted to ask, has there been any reconsideration, or can you tell us a little bit about the discussions you might have had with the U.S. in terms of either selling or offloading the Russian missile defense systems in place of a U.S. or a NATO compliant air defense system? Thank you.
It will not be an easy decision, of course, but first we should see if we can provide the defense systems, missile defense system, anti-ballistic, from the US or from other Western partners. Still, it is not there. This is my answer. Hopefully, these negotiations can move forward, and Turkish government will consider what to do with these Russian anti-ballistic missile systems. But certainly, one thing we guaranteed for our allies, the systems, if used, will not be interacted with any NATO systems or NATO weapons. That's okay.
Great. So one more question back there in the middle. Yeah.
Thanks very much, Adel Hamezia. The question on IKEA and Ankara was taken, so I'll leave that for later. But one country you mentioned at the beginning, you said you'd served in Tripoli. I also saw in your CV you served in Sarajevo. And of course, the common denominator recently is the Yugoslav dams and Libya and a Turkish contractor, which was apparently involved with some of the repairs, etc., in 2007. But that aside, post-elections, where is Libya in your foreign policy priorities? If we were to rank, maybe you can give us a number or tell us what your role is going forward there, given where we are and the devastation.
Yeah, thanks for reminding. Of course, it is a high priority, Libya, because of historic cultural affiliation and because of Turkish presence there. It is a priority. And I'm not aware of if any Turkish company was involved in construction or repair of this company. If it was, I would hear about it, because we are following very closely. And I have first-hand experience of what Turkish companies did there, because I follow it very closely. And they did big projects with almost half cost of European and other companies. If it was, we would hear about this. Of course, one problem is there, the division of authority. These days, we are in good dialogue with both sides, with all sides, not too many sides. And we are pushing everybody to hold elections, a fair and acceptable elections in there. So Libya is a must, is a priority for us. We don't want any further conflict, and our dialogue with the regional countries will help it, I think. But one thing is clear, that we want a stable, united Libya, as in the past, but with a better governance in the future. What I know is that, of course, as I said, Turkish diplomats, military diplomats, one thing we achieved, I am proud of, is that we aborted a possible bloodshed or massacre or extension of armed conflict in capital Tripoli. This is the basic. These days, all sides are aware of Turkish intentions and good faith. Of course, these floods are sorry about it, and Turkish institutions are doing their best. I think they are the best in the area because of experience. And Turkish civil society also is doing its best and the impression that Turkey doesn't have any dialogue presence in the East is wrong. We are there with our own capacity, especially humanitarian and economic. Thank you.
So I promised you some interesting food for thought before our actual food, and Your Excellency, you provided that for us. I want to say first two things. I'm sorry we don't have more time for questions, and I think Kate's going to come up here. Number one, I want to ask everybody to join me in thanking His Excellency for joining us today on a fantastic conversation. And number two, I believe Kate is going to take the microphone again and give us our marching orders and tell us what the rest of today looks like. So, but thank you again.
Thank you, gentlemen.